Good afternoon, everybody. It's 1 p.m. Thank you for coming to the second session of the Pacific Division Staff Services Confidence Building Series. Super excited to see all of you here again. We are holding weekly sessions through the month of June, and we're really glad you could join us today. My name is Susan Wananen, and I'll be the facilitator for much of this series. And typically I deploy in staff services, and I'm a volunteer in the California Gold Country region. And the goal for this series, we talked about this last week as well, is to serve as a refresher to build confidence in your skills, to provide practical tips for working in staff services, introduce staffing to people who are just curious about what we do in staff services. You can read all our different goals on this slide. The topics are going to be sent to you ahead of time, and you can choose to attend any or all of the sessions that appeal to you and work in your schedule. I should let you know that I am recording these sessions just because there's a lot of people who are unable to attend at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a Thursday. We know there's lots of competition for people's times. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to go through a couple of housekeeping items. So please mute yourself and turn off your camera when not speaking to preserve bandwidth. Please offer suggestions and ask questions in chat. There will be time at the end to raise your hand and ask questions, but during the presentation, we just ask that you keep the questions in chat. And then one of the things we're going to do each week is ask you to type your name and region in the chat. It's just a great way for people to know who's here and then maybe see familiar faces or familiar names at least. And we feel like that's a huge part of these sessions, is just building that staffing community so that when you actually do deploy, you'll already feel like you know a lot of the people you're working with. So again, the sessions will be recorded, transcription will be provided. I'm very excited I'm really excited you're able to join today because we have a special guest presenter who's going to talk about the first 24 hours on a local response. And we know that every region is slightly different, but this kind of is a lot of good best practices and the tasks that every region will need to complete. I'd like to introduce Peggy Pinerbasi, who is the Workforce Engagement Manager for the Northern California Coastal Region. It's a perfect topic for Peggy because I have deployed with her in the past, and she's super calm under pressure and is always thinking 2 steps ahead. So Peggy, if you'd like to unmute yourself and share your slides, it's all yours.
Thank you, Susan. I'm really excited to be here. I'm going to take a second here and hopefully pull this up.
I know Sherry's not with us today, so I'm really feeling technically challenged. So I hope you have no problems, Peggy.
Oh, fingers crossed. It's usually about a 50-50 chance for me.
Oh, I know, we should be so good at Teams by now, right?
Yeah, as soon as I get it figured out, something always changes.
You got it.
Oh, yay, excellent. So thank you so much. Welcome. This is Staff Services, the first 24 hours, or what to expect when disaster is in your region. For those of you who are familiar with Staff Services, you know we have a wonderful tool in Volunteer Connection called Disaster Management. We use this tool to communicate staffing needs, identify available qualified responders, assign them to the response, and then this tool helps us keep track of their work and lodging locations, and even if they received an evaluation. As marvelous as this tool is, there is a catch. You need a disaster response operation number in order to use the tool. If a disaster occurs without notice, and here in the Pacific Division, we excel at no-notice events, there's a period of time, there's a time lag between the start of the event to when a DRO number is issued and we have access to disaster management. For some events, that delay may be as long as 24 to 36 hours. In this presentation, we'll focus on that specific time period, the period before we can use disaster management to assist the staff services team with the tasks we still need to do. It's important to note As Susan pointed out, that while I'll be introducing some documents and procedures, there are no hard and fast rules. How you keep track and support workers during this time period can vary from region to region. It can even vary from territory to territory within a region. It may even vary based on the size and scope of your disaster. What I hope you take away from today is an understanding of what needs to be done during this time period. Take it back to your teams so you can discuss and start preparing for how your team will handle any future events. So given that information, here are our objectives for today, and that's to provide an overview of the initial steps staff services takes to stand up a local disaster response operation, view options for managing workers before a DRO number is issued, and cover the steps that you can take to prepare to stand up a DRO staffing unit. Most local disasters start as a disaster action team response. Even many of our wildfires start relatively small and escalate into something larger. How do we know when an event is larger than a DAC call and requires staff services support? Technically speaking, a DRO number is issued when the estimated budget for the response is over $10,000. Usually we're not counting dollars right at the very start. In Northern California coastal region, we trigger staff services as soon as an incident escalates to a point requiring specific activities beyond a DAC call. For example, if you've got a multifamily fire that's displaced 50 families and you're needing to stand up a shelter, you're going to need shelter workers, logistics people to move supplies. You may need a feeding team. So you're needing those specific activities to go in with their skills and knowledge to support that response. At that point, we trigger staff services. Why call staff services? And there are several good reasons. Staff services focuses on recruiting responders, and that allows other activities to focus on what they do best. So, for example, mass care can start really focusing their energy on setting up and working the shelter, and staff services unit can begin calling members for future shifts. Also, staff services has the big picture of who we have available and what skills they have, so we can plug them in where they're needed most. We don't want our only available IRV driver to be maybe a mass care shelter SA. We may have other people who can fill that role. And so we'd want that, staff services would strategically be able to put that IRV driver in the IRV driver position. Last and certainly not least, staff services team members are trained to recruit, assign, and support disaster responders. We're professionals at this. We know what our responders need, what information they need, and how to provide it. And that'll set them up for a successful response. So now that we know why we initiate staff services, let's focus on the steps that our team takes once it's activated. Staff services usually activates with a call, and it may differ from region to region and even event to event, but most likely that call is going to come from a duty officer, a disaster program manager, or a regional disaster officer. Who receives the call usually depends on the size and scope of the event. For a small event like a multifamily fire, it may be the local staffing lead or deployment team lead or workforce engagement coordinator that gets that call. For larger local events, it may be the regional staffing lead or the regional deployment team lead or the disaster workforce engagement manager that gets that call. Or it may be different depending on your region. So after you get the call, what next? First, take a deep breath. That call generally triggers a rush of adrenaline. It can feel a little bit overwhelming at first, thinking of all the things that need to get done. But if you take time now to prepare your team, become familiar with the initiating process, and prepare some templates and tools ahead of time, you'll be able to quickly recruit, assign, and support the workers you need for your response. What does that initiating process look like? There's some simple steps for a smooth start. Let you read those. We'll start with gathering information. When you get that call for staff services help, gather as much information as you can about the response. How do we know what information we need? For those of you who've taken the Staff Services Fundamentals course, or if you've already served on a disaster relief operation in staff services, you know the importance of that anticipatory customer service. We want to gather all the information our workers will want to know. So we want to collect what happened. That's generally the first thing that our responders want to know once we make that call. We want to gather how many were affected. That's important for you in determining how large your team will need to be. So the larger the event, the more people that were affected, the more responders we're going to need to support that event. The larger your team will need to be to support those responders. What services are we providing? Is it a shelter? Is it an evacuation center? What's going on? Is it 2 shelters? Is it 3 shelters? We also want to know who's already involved. Often we're not the first call that's made. A lot of times there's already leadership identified. There may be already people out on the response. The DAT team or the mass care team may have actually have an initial set of people that went out. So we just want to make sure that we gather that information so we can support those responders. We want to gather who's needed and basically which gaps are needed and how many of each, where and to whom they report, and the shift start time and duration. Again, collect as much information as you can, but be aware that responses evolve rapidly and the information may change, or it's early in the response, it may not be known. Don't let lack of one of the pieces of information hold you up. Just continue on with the next steps and backfill with the information and update as you receive it. For gathering information, I'm probably oversharing here, but I'm a 2 cup of coffee in the morning person. It takes me 2 cups of coffee for my brain cells to start firing. I found disasters are a lot like babies. They love to come in the middle of the night. So I've actually created a checklist for myself for gathering information and then those initial steps that I want to take. I keep that in my bedstand. And then if there is a disaster in the middle of the night, I can reach in and get that and kind of jog my memory. I do know from past experience when you're getting that initial call from the DPM or the duty officer in charge, they are super busy. So once you hang up the phone, it's sometimes quite a bit before you can get in touch with them again. So you want to keep them on the phone and get that information as much as possible. I do have a link to a lot of these templates that we have. They're pretty generic and certainly customizable for your own needs. They'll be included on the PowerPoint deck that gets sent out afterwards. All right, after you've got the call, your next step is really to get some help. I follow the advice Rena Crowder gave me when I first started, staffing first. Not only will the workload be easier, but much more enjoyable as well. Once you have your team in place, set them up for success. Make sure everyone knows their roles and tasks. They understand any processes you are using. They have all the relevant documents and can access shared files. Establish regular team meetings, and don't forget to allow time for feedback from the team during the meetings. Now that you've got your team in place, it's time to prepare your documents. Taking a little extra time at the front end of a response will save you lots of time and headaches down the road. If you have experienced staff services team members that you've recruited, they can be helping you prepare these documents. Here's a list of the tools and documents you'll be needing. We'll be going through each of these in more detail. It looks like a lot, but again, if you take that time to work out the process ahead of time, you can create templates for all these documents. So when disaster occurs, you're really just filling in the missing information. Before I start, I want to point out that there are really two pieces of information we need to keep track of for our workforce. We need to know when they're available to help, specifically when they're available, for how long, and how far they're willing to travel. If they do participate on the response, we also need to keep track of when and where they worked, what Gaap they did, and who was their supervisor. Let's start by talking about the ways to track availability. There are different ways to gather availability. We'll start with updating disaster responder availability in Volunteer Connection. And this is a way probably most of us are very familiar with. It's a really good way to gather information about which of our gapped disaster responders have blocks of time available for a response. We'll go over shortly how to run those reports of availability, the disaster responder availability. Often for local responses, we don't have enough responders available for chunks of time to staff the response. But fortunately, many of our local responders are available to help with individual shifts. Since we really want to utilize our local responders whenever possible, and because it can take days to bring in outside help, it's essential to gather shift availability. And you can do that several ways. You can have workers email their availability to a centralized email address, and then have one of your team members keep track of that availability on a spreadsheet. This process works, but it can be labor intensive. It's also easy to lose track of emails in those email strings. But for a very small response, that may be the easiest way to keep track of availability. Another way to keep track of availability is to set up an availability shift tool. Having members indicate their availability in a response availability tool can save a lot of time when you need to quickly identify who's available for specific shifts. The example I'm showing here, sorry for the small size, members are able to go in and update for specific days if they're available for a day shift or a night shift. The red boxes indicate that they're not available. Gathering not available information can also be really helpful to your staff services team if you need to do a call down. Anybody who's not available, that's one less phone call you need to make. I know in NCCR, we do have an availability shift tool set up at the ready all the time. However, we don't ask our volunteers to go in and indicate that specific shift availability unless we have an active response or unless we have a potential for an active response, so like a red flag warning. There is a link to more information about managing shift tools. Again, that'll be on the PowerPoint slide deck. You may find that you're not getting enough workers quickly enough. Oops, I skipped a slide. Okay, almost every response, as I mentioned, begins before a DRO number is issued. And unfortunately, we can't keep track of those workers in disaster management. But we do need to keep track of them. We do need to keep track of them so that we have that information when to support them. There are multiple ways to keep track of members who have participated on the disaster response operation. One, again, is using a shift tool. You can set that up and keep track of members, add members as they are participating on the response. If you're not comfortable standing up a shift tool quickly, another option is using an Excel based staffing pattern. Got the example here. It's brutally small, but I'll share the link and you'll be able to see it a little bit better. You'll notice that on the left-hand column, the far left, is the positions that you need. So shelter SA, one line for each needed position. To the right, the columns are day shift and night shift for each day. So a Monday day shift, a Monday night shift. As members fill the shift, you can pop their names and phone numbers in the cells and then have this document stored in a locked shared Teams file. And you can share that document with DRO leadership so that they can take a look at any time to see who's due, how the staffing looks. Is the shelter staff? Do we have staffing members or shelter workers coming in? Having this document viewable to your DRO leadership will save you a lot of time. You won't have to be emailing rosters and other information to the shift managers. They'll be able to view it directly in Teams. No matter what method you use to keep track of workers during this period, it's important to transfer the information to disaster management as soon as it's available. If you're using a shift tool for local workers, you can utilize the DRO shift tool. This is a wonderful new feature that really helps us engage and support our local volunteers. You may find that you're not getting enough workers quickly enough. In that case, you'll want to create a call down list. There are different ways to create a call down list, two ways that I know of. The different ways result in different formats. Both formats have advantages and disadvantages, but they each contain information about a member's gap and availability. The first way to run a call down list is through disaster management. And I mentioned that we don't have access to the tool to keep track of volunteers on the response, but if you hold a steady state position, like a deployment team or a workforce engagement member that's deploying volunteers, you have access to disaster management and you'll be able to run reports through that. The one report that I find really useful is the disaster responder availability by Gaap. A couple things to know about this report is that it only pulls information about qualified disaster responders. And it creates one line for each person for each gap. So if a person holds multiple gaps, they may appear multiple times on the report. This report is particularly useful if you're looking for members with specific gaps like disaster mental health, SV. But if you are using it for a call down, be thoughtful about how you divvy up the list. If you divide by gap, you want to make sure that members aren't receiving several calls from different members of your team, one for each gap. Another way to run reports is through the group share. All group share leaders are able to run the Disaster Responder Information Report. Things to be aware about this report is that it includes information about everyone in the group share, both disaster responders and non-responders too. The report has one line per person, and gaps are listed over multiple cells. If you're using this report, be aware that you may be contacting people with limited or no training. It can also be challenging to identify members with a particular gap. It's a little bit more of an egg hunt. The positive thing is that because the group pulls from a group share, you can really tailor that call down list by geography or by activity as well. Having members that have little or no training can also be useful. We know that for local responses, we often have tasks that need done. For instance, running supplies from headquarters to a site that really require little or no training. So running that group share report would really allow us to engage a lot of local volunteers for those types of tasks. Once you have your call down list, the next thing is to prepare a call down script and distribute that to everyone who's going to be helping with call downs. Having a call script makes it easy way to recruit new team members to help with call downs. It ensures consistent messaging, provides confidence to team members who may be new to making calls. It also ensures that we're gathering as much information from each call as possible. Again, there'll be a little link to the call down script template. Every person who's assigned to a shift should be receiving a follow-up email. This step really helps avoid confusion. It ensures responders get consistent and complete reporting instruction. Having a template also saves time for recruiters. They don't have to reinvent the wheel with each confirmation email. They don't have to type out the whole thing. Having the confirmation email is also a record of the responder's commitment. A lot of times when you're making that recruiting call, you're talking about different days, discussing different open positions and different needs. And during the conversation, a lot of dates and shifts may come up, and there may be just a little mix up of which day the staff services person thought the responder was coming and the day the responder thought the responder was coming. So sending out that confirmation email really locks in that both teams are on the same page. Your confirmation email should include the date and time of shifts. Thank you for, first and foremost, a thank you for responding. The dates and times of shifts, their specific assignment, what they're going out to do, reporting location, supervisor name and contact information, any special instructions, if the parking is awkward or, they need to go around the back of the parking lot, please be sure to include that. You want to also include any important reminders. Bring your badge if you have it, your Red Cross gear if you've got it, wear closed-toed shoes, all those good pieces of information to help support that responder. Don't forget to include your staff services contact information as well. Now that you're prepared, it's time to go ahead and fill those empty positions with workers. So you'll be sending out a notification email and beginning your call down. Send out those emails, those notification emails or texts if you can. Be sure to include details about the incident, any immediate needs that you have, and instructions for how you want to collect that availability. Also include information about upcoming or ongoing needs as well. A rookie mistake I made at the beginning was to only gather information about the next day. Are you available to work tomorrow? I was fooled when the job director said, hey, oh, don't worry that this shelter will be closed tomorrow. Invariably, something comes up and the shelter ends up extending, or the repairs just can't get made in the day, or something, but that shelter doesn't close the next day. And then you'll find yourself sending out another batch of recruiting emails the following day. So gathering a good 2 weeks of availability really can help save time, no matter what anybody tells you the length of the response will be. Last but not least, keeping good records really helps avoid staffing errors and results to better support of both the response and our responders. Filling in workers on the assigned spreadsheet or in your shift tool as quickly as they're filled helps prevent duplication of assignments, and it also makes sure that we get that recorded. Monitor your emails for availability, transfer any data that comes into your availability shift tool. On a quick note, large-scale responses require large-scale support. If you are having a large response, or if you're not comfortable with what's going on, don't hesitate to reach out to your supervisor. Do alert RMS for very large events so they can be there to support you as well. If it is a large event, it's also important to bring in our volunteer services partners. Volunteer services initiates the event-based volunteer portal. They're the ones that open that portal. They make that decision when it's time to switch on the event-based volunteer mode based on several factors, including the size and scope of the disaster, public interest, and the availability of roles for them to do. So it's vitally important to keep them informed of what's going on. So this was a lot of information that was covered today, but know that there's a lot of support available to you as well. Here is a list. We've got sites on the Exchange. We've got a wonderful staff services toolkit and a deployment toolkit, and a disaster event-based volunteer toolkit. Each of these are chock full of really good support job aids and documents to help us on a response. National and Division are both amazing resources. For questions about the response itself, specific staffing procedures, you'll be contacting disaster staffing at redcross.org. I know that mailbox is monitored 24/7 and they are very responsive. The Disaster Staffing Center is our resource mobilization and support unit. Again, they really help with mobilizing our workforce, our workers, making sure we get those positions filled. Also, an amazingly helpful team. The emails are very similar, but don't worry if you email accidentally the wrong team. They're really gracious and always forward it to where it should be going. We also have our RMS Pacific team specifically. Patrice and Susan are just wonderful resources for us here in Pacific. We're super lucky. There's some things that you can do, blue sky, to be ready for disaster. Right now, we can identify and train team members, prepare and customize the tools and resources you want to use for your region, your territory. and store them in a file that your team members can access. Do a staffing exercise, a nice tabletop of starting up a DRO. Just going through the steps really, I think, helps the process run smoother when it does occur. It's also the time to prepare our responders. Familiarize them with what the recruiting process looks like. So let them know what to expect once they submit their availability. They'll really understand why submitting that availability is so important. Show responders how to use any special tools that you design. So if you do decide to go with an availability shift tool, or if you've got a special email address for local responses that you'll be using to gather availability, let them know ahead of time. Encourage responders to keep up to date with training. A quick review of deployment fundamentals can be super helpful to our responders, and encourage them to maintain their availability in Volunteer Connection. Actually, I'll plug too, we've got a new, there's a new deployment fundamentals for local responders. I think that can be very helpful for our local responses. Well, that's all I have for today. Are there any questions?
Hi, Peggy. Thank you so much. That was a lot of information. Really appreciate you putting that together. There are some questions. There were some questions in the chat that I think we'll address first, and then we'll give people a chance to ask you questions more specifically by raising their hands. Erin asked if there is availability where you would find the staff services DRO checklist. And Melissa directed her to the staff services toolkit. Do you have any other suggestions?
There is one on the toolkit. Like I said, this PowerPoint presentation, the slide deck, we can email to anybody who's attending. I do have some links to some generic ones that we created here in NCCR that can be customized for your region.
Thank you. And I meant to mention that, Peggy, and everyone on the call, is that Peggy has put together a PDF of this presentation, and we will send that out in an email after the call. So thank you for providing all those resources, Peggy. Irene had a question, and Irene, I might have you come off mute just to, just if you wanted to ask this question. She had a question about the standard ratio of affected people and responders. Irene, can you clarify that just a little bit?
Yeah, I was checking that how many people should be engaged at the time onset of the disaster. So is there any standard policy or something like this?
Yeah. So actually, I think in the staff services fundamentals, there's a reference to anticipating for like a level 2 response. I think they anticipate, what is it, 30 responders? Sorry.
Oh yeah, we're getting a little echo. Let's see. There. Are you still there, Peggy?
I am. It's so much easier if I've unmuted myself.
I'm glad you didn't leave us.
I am still here. Yeah, there is some guidance in the staff services fundamentals training. And I think for a level 2, it's somewhere around anticipating about 30 responders will be coming. For a level 3, I think it was more along the lines of 60 to 100. So then you can base how many staff services team members you would need based on that. So for a level 2, and I look at that as usually opening up one site, so a shelter or an evacuation center generally is about a level 2, and I'm going to need 2 to 3 staff services team members for support. As you start adding sites, for each site, it just about equals 2 or 3 until you get to really large DROs where you'll start adding more specific activities within staff services like training and staff relations. But I'd say about 2 to 3 per site. Sorry, that was long.
Oh, that's good. Does that answer your question, Irene?
Yes,
It does. All right, perfect. And I think it's interesting, Peggy, that you mentioned staff relations and that I know you touched on the volunteer services part too. Is that something where do you have a communication with the staff or with the volunteer services people in that first day, or do you kind of wait until later just to see if there's an issue with staff relations?
Usually we don't activate staff relations right away. We haven't often had, in fact, I don't think I've ever had an issue in the first 24 hours, happily.
That's good.
At least one that I've heard of in the first 24 hours. But we do initiate a volunteer services call very early just to discuss what's going on. So they're looped in to what's going on with the event, and they can start looking at the intake queue and determining if it's time to switch on that EBV portal.
Perfect. So Melissa made a comment, which I think you could probably address too, Peggy, but she said it's super important to have Red Cross emails kind of already established before, just for ease of getting into Teams and being able to share documents. Is that something that you would recommend for staffing people?
I would advocate that we do have Red Cross emails. Yes, I do advocate that.
We have found it easier, usually on a DR to have everybody with that. And you don't have to use it all the time, but it's nice if it's active when people are deployed, for sure. Okay, Luke has a question. Do you know of a tool to contact responders based on the availability report? Do you know of an auto texting type feature?
I do not know of one. I think LA may have at least the ability to text a specific list of people. So you could use that availability report, get an Excel list of email or phone numbers, and then use that. So maybe Luke following up with Marcus would be good.
Yeah, and Jane from Southern California says that they use OneCall now to text volunteers. So Luke, would you like to share what capability we do have in the division for that system, or the different systems?
There we go, unmuted. So we're doing a pilot right now in Central California with the ad hoc system. So the thing we use on big DRs, but for the region actually having that. We don't have the bandwidth. I know National doesn't have the bandwidth right now to bring all 10 of our regions on, but about half of our regions have capabilities. There is Alert Media, there's One Call Now, there's some other ones. So if your region doesn't have that, we want to work with you to ensure that your region can have that, because as many of us have lived through, going down and calling a whole bunch of people and texting might take you hours in the middle of the night, as Peggy said, when with a system, we can either load information in quickly, have preloaded information, and you can do that call down in a matter of 30 seconds. So we can work towards that. So that's something Susan and I'll if you don't have that in your region, let me and Susan know, and we'll start working with you to figure out how we, with RMS at National, how we start getting you that capability.
Thank you. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Luke. Peggy, so there's a question from Robin Dieter in the chat, and she's wondering, in the first 24 hours when a DRO number hasn't yet been assigned, are we taking time to ask the pre-assignment health questionnaire questions?
Robin, thank you so much. Yes, ideally, we absolutely would ask those questions. Yes.
And what form are you using for that, Peggy?
We use the old form, the one that was yeah, the old pre-assignment health questionnaire form.
Right.
But
right.
do know that once they are assigned in Volunteer Connection, if they're still assigned, they'll be repeating that health questionnaire. But a best practice is definitely to go through that just to make sure they're healthy or they're aware of the. Right.
Absolutely. Especially these days, right? So I think if there are any more questions, this would be this is your chance to raise your hand. I know that we covered a lot of material and we're grateful that there's going to be a lot of resources in the document that we're sending out. But we don't necessarily want to keep people longer than we need to either. We've had such a great reception to the series, and other divisions have been asking us too, like, is there a way that they can do it? So just really appreciate your participation today and your willingness to learn about staffing. We're super excited that there's this energy behind it in our division. We are looking forward to having another exciting session next week. It's the same time, same place, and we're going to be sending out those emails, those reminder emails every week so that people don't forget. Next week we have Navigating Disaster Management and Volunteer Connection, and our presenter is going to be Paul Beatty from National. So this is going to be like a tutorial on the tricks of the staff services trades, and it's some of the basics of disaster management, the basic functions, but also some of the changes that have occurred. We know that there are always changes, and it's helpful to know about those changes before we're deployed. So we hope you can join us next week for that. I see Nancy Wakeman has her hand up. Nancy.
Yes, ma'am. I was going to ask if we have a team site for Pacific Division staffing that we can post a lot of these, maybe not 100% official, but, fabulously useful, checklists and tips and tools and so on and so forth.
Yeah, that's a great idea, Nancy, to have a central location where you can go in and find things like that. So we'll get something put together and let you know about that.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the suggestion. And then Sandy is wondering if there is a copy of the health questionnaire that we can be sent to her or include in the meeting. And so that could be something else that we include in that site with all the different handy forms. Yes, Susan. Susan Denovit, did you have a comment or a question?
Sorry, I forgot to hit unmute. Yeah, this is in the chat, but I'm wondering how you assign the hardship codes at the beginning of a job.
Peggy, can you take that one?
Yeah, I would say the very beginning, Susan, like that middle of the night piece. We're not usually assigning the hardship codes. However, we do get health services as soon as we can to take a look around, and they're tasked with assigning the hardship codes to the DRO itself, and then we communicate that.
Okay, yeah, I'm glad it's being done.
That's the nurse in you, Susan.
Yeah.
So I think that brings up actually a really great point too. We're going to have a presentation coming up because Ron from Cascades asked earlier about the DRO shift tool. And so we are going to have a presentation later in the series that's talking about what happens once you get your DR number and the different resources and tools that then come into play, including the DRO shift tool and the pre-assignment health questionnaire that becomes automated, and putting in the hardship codes. Those are all things that get triggered by that DR creation. Denise, would you like to say something?
Just, and I know that Paul's probably going to go over this, but the way we request hotel rooms and things has changed dramatically. And that's one of the first things that maybe you need to think about. I mean, if you're going to be housing people, staff, you might want to think about getting the lodging team on board sooner rather than later, just to handle that part for you, because it is a little different.
That's a really good point, Denise. And I know that you are a lodging specialist, so that would be something that that would be important to you. And I think it's really important for other people to keep in mind. We are having Carl Gingrich talk to us on May 5th. He'll do a presentation on lodging for this group. So hopefully that's something that he can touch on as well. Well, I think at this point we'll adjourn and just hope everybody has a wonderful rest of their Thursday and look forward to seeing you all again next week. And again, thanks so much, Peggy, for doing the presentation. Just really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. Sorry, it was a lot.
There's a lot to do, right?
Thank you.
That first 24 hours.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Susan and
everybody.
Peggy, both of you, for making this happen.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
Thanks, Susan.
And Sherry.
Thanks.
Peggy.
Bye, you guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
It was very informative.
Thank you.
Okay.